Hello, you're listening to Radio Free Flint. I'm Arthur Bush, your host. Today's guest is Anna Clark, an author of The Poison City, Flint's Water, and the American Urban Tragedy. Anna Clark talks to us about the origins of the Flint water crisis, how Flint's water became contaminated, who's responsible for that, and was this problem something that was today's, or was it something that had brewed in the past? If you like this episode and this channel, please subscribe.
Dog is turning round and round, turning round and round.
Flint was designed to be a city of about 200,000 people, and at one time inched up that way. Today it's got, I think your book cited it was 96 or 98,000 or whatever. It's probably down now even more since the pandemic. But we still have all those pipes. And the cost of maintenance of those pipes is extraordinary. What's your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, I do appreciate how you're talking about this larger structural problem that so many cities that have lost tremendous population and industry, face with their infrastructure, because it is a real problem. And it was like the water crisis in Flint before the water crisis, right? And certainly.
So there was a water crisis before there was a water crisis in Flint.
Yeah, it just literally was. They were losing like a third of their water just through leaks, right? Which of course just makes these bills that are already among the most expensive in the nation, most expensive even before we account for the fact that as a disproportionately poor population, and of course, but even at those rates, you can't even maintain the system you've got because you have a much smaller population shouldering the burden of it. It's just mathematically impossible. There's just it can't be done, right? Flint, that meant also having like pipes of a large circumference, all of which literally made this water crisis worse. Not just, first of all, like in the story of like how the putting the city in this vulnerable place to begin with, but also the fact that as these pipes are corroding, when they're when the water is like passing more slowly through areas where there's a lot of vacancy or sitting stagnant longer in these like giant pipes where it's just not moving as fast, then it has more time to get more saturated with contaminants by the time that people draw it from their taps. So this like hollowing out of the population and of the industry while having this like overly large aging water system made the events of this water crisis worse, in addition to like creating a sort of water crisis of its own, of affordability and access and quality. And it's not an easy problem to solve, as you're kind of like intuiting. Like in Detroit, that was like a huge debate of, it was like 10 years ago, there's this whole proposal of like, kind of like what you're saying of like, what if we just like move people into like be more, so it's we're more densely populated. We can't afford to send, services, not just water, but like ambulances and things, when there's like in these like relatively, like to the far field from each other. But it did have a tremendous backlash against that because people felt like, well, first of all, if you start undercutting the services there, you're dooming the place, like it'll never be like reinvested. And second of all, it is like triggering the living memory that so many people have of other kinds of like urban renewal, like schemes. It's reminding people of that, where they're like forced to move,
I want to ask you about this. That is the austerity politics aspect of this, because I think your book and your research concludes that that's part of the cause of the Flint water crisis. Back to your book, the research that you did to do this book does deal with austerity politics. And when you look at austerity politics, if you accept that as a premise, did you find that to be the case in the Flint water crisis as part of the reason for the problem?
Here's one thing that's strange, and honestly, this is a question that's still at the top of my mind that I look forward to understanding more, whether through writing, whether through what comes out in legal proceedings or whatever it is. But basically, you know, this shorthand explanation that a lot of people give for this, what happened with the water story, is they say that, like, you know, Flint switched its water to save money. And when I looked back at that, I was like, well, I was curious about that. Like, well, exactly how much money, and, you know, what was that looking like at the time, you know, with the information people had at the time? What was like the, you know, what did the, like the leaders know? What did the, you know, and consultants know? What did the people know? You know, what were people working with here? How is that conversation going? And the idea of like saving money, like, it was honestly like pretty foggy. I mean, Flint like went into a significant amount of debt beyond its legal debt limit to join the KWA, you know, in addition
And
to
the KWA is the water pipeline, the new water pipeline to Port Huron.
right, like the kind of, so they were going to leave Detroit, which, you know, they felt like, you know, charged us expensive rates and we don't have a seat on the board. And this was some of the angst around that, going back, you know, for a long time. And they're like, we're going to join the KWA system, and we're going to finance like a third of its construction, you know, that through like bonds, you know, even though the city, because it's broke, is already at its legal debt limit. And this is part of what's come up in a lot of the charges, is people, the kind of workaround that was designed to finance that. And the water they get eventually from the KWA, they're going to have to treat themselves. It's raw water, you know, from Lake Huron, as opposed to treated water from Lake Huron that Detroit provided. So they were going to have to staff, you know, have its treatment plant in full operation, right? You know, like they're going to have to invest in it, and they're going to have to, you know, do the staffing for it, and they're going to have to do that for long term. All of these are like costs that they're taking on to get something it already had in the first place, which is drinking water from Lake Huron, you know? And if people thought it was going to make their bills go down, or at least stop the rate increases, they were also disappointed, because shortly after this water switch, emergency managers signed a 2-year budget that that involved like rate increases that were like up to 12%, I believe. So a lot of the like, this is going to save the city money, like, I'm a little bit mystified about like it didn't seem to be about what that actually meant, because it doesn't seem to be saving anybody money, neither the city nor the residents. There was a lot of language at the time about how long-term this will save the region $20 million or so, you know, annually or something like that. But like the region, you know, like it was kind of like put in more vague terms. So the idea about it like being like an austerity choice, I'm a little bit confused by it, because even though an emergency manager was in town to ostensibly get rid of redundancies and all this kind of stuff, and even though Flint had like truly, you know, a lot of really urgent needs, the thing that we went into greater debt for was to provide something it already had in the first place. So I'm confused by that.
Yeah, and in your research, you said you basically say that there's been a great deal of government malfeasance, and you spoke to that earlier to some extent. But who is malfeasant?
Well, I think that I think there's a number of things. Like, one is, I do think the folks who are supervising this water switch at the Department of Environmental Quality had a lot of responsibility to make sure the switch was done properly, that the investments were made to treat the water well, that when problems did emerge, that they were responded to effectively, that basically that the city of Flint would be, if we're going to do this whole complex 2-time water switch, that we're going to do it in a way that makes sure that the people of Flint like have quality drinking water every single day of that, you know, that that didn't happen. It didn't happen. And despite there being a lot of reasons why, even at the outset, you know, the investments at the plant, the staffing, some like red flags that were raised at the time, that there were, it didn't happen. And so I feel like that that's a problem. right? And I think later on there was like more problems, that emerged too with the folks in the health department and others who were like monitoring, the blood lead tests and some of the things like this. Some of the information that was not as transparent as and accurate as it should have been. The fact that this Legionnaires outbreak was going on for 2 years and killing people, and that it wasn't even made public until January of 2016, when the world spotlight was had finally come to Flint a few months after it had returned to Detroit. The fact that wasn't made public is extraordinary.
It's extraordinary because it was the largest outbreak of Legionella in the world.
It's a real problem. Like the fact, it was like, and in other communities, I looked a little bit at this, like other communities that faced Legionnaires outbreak handled it very differently. Like one reason you are transparent, even when you're still investigating the cause of it or whatever, is so people can make decisions that to keep themselves safe. That right? I feel like that's pretty crucial information, and it was important to have been transparent about that so that health providers are doing the proper testing and monitoring, you know what I mean? Like that it's widely suspected that a lot of people who were sickened or died of pneumonia over those years might have actually had Legionnaire's disease, but it wasn't the medical information wasn't collected as such or tested as such, in part because health providers didn't know that was this particular thing that they should be looking for. And the symptoms of it are very similar to pneumonia. So, I think that has denied us an opportunity to have a full understanding of what happened, right? First of all, with the Legionnaires outbreak and what its human cost was, and it potentially put a lot of people, quite a large number of people, at risk for this outbreak. That knee-jerk defense can in fact cause a lot of the same problems that we did see in Flint. In other words, we have decaying infrastructure, segregation, concentrated poverty. A lot of these things are problems everywhere that we all have to reckon with. And if people interpret that as Flint's story is a parable that helps them awaken them to that in their own communities, then great.
Why is my water turning brown? Water turning brown, my water turning brown. Why does my baby cry at night? Baby cry at night, my baby cry at night. Dog is turning round and round, turning round and round, turning round and round. Cat is lying on the ground, lying on the ground, yes, lying on the ground.